From the moment we open our eyes, the world around us is gathering data. Devices, apps, and services, all collecting, analysing, and using information about us. This can make life easier, more connected, even more enjoyable. But it can also cause harm to people and society as a whole. A growing group of professionals is shaping how this data is collected and used to ensure that technology serves us, empowers us, and protects us, rather than controls or exploits us. Through their stories, we explore the concept of privacy and why it matters, and witness the rise of a new profession. This is Privacy People.
So Sanjay, what is privacy?
Okay, so privacy to means is that anything I would like to be it personal, don't want to disclose with someone else. So that is the privacy to me. Yeah.
I've taught several times seminars on privacy, and we always start with what is privacy? And sometimes I share when my kids were very small, I asked them before I went to class, what do you think privacy is? And they would start with the most basic, which is, well, it's what you do when you go into the bathroom. You close the door. And that is a correct answer. In the context of how the modern privacy profession, or actually the privacy profession, took off, the answer to what is privacy starts with, what do you do with information that identifies individuals? It's what is known as informational privacy, and it's one facet of the larger issue of privacy. And that is what happens and who controls what happens to information that identifies you as you and me as me.
Privacy is about having control. It's about the ability to autonomously and confidently make decisions about what other people know about you and what other people and institutions can do with information that's collected and processed about you.
What is privacy is the $100,000 question. I mean, if you go back far enough to, if you're a Bible believer, it's, when those fig leaves had to be had because of the snake in the garden, right? Or if you go back to 1890, this seminal Harvard Review article, it's the right to be let alone. Who knew back then what it would morph into today? Or Margaret Cho, she's a very ribald comedian. I think she's funny. She said it's something you give up to show the world you're extraordinary. Well, that's thoughtful. Or Bob Dylan, it's a right that you can sell, but you can't buy it back.
So privacy is our right to be able to find information, find community, move through the world without fear of people judging you or watching every move. It's a huge element of personal dignity and also personal freedom. And I think that matters for us as individuals, but it also matters for a democratic society.
Privacy is the domain that every individual has to have in order to maintain human dignity. A space in which to think and reflect, to express oneself without necessarily being tabulated, accounted for, anticipated, predicted, marketed to. It is a reflection of inherent rights of dignity that are vested in every human individual.
Human beings need moments, times, spaces where we can have seclusion, have a sense of being apart from what otherwise might be our group. And so I think privacy is a fundamental human truth. It is a truth in that we all need it, we all use it, we all appreciate it, we all fight for it, frankly, in our lives.
Privacy and the perception of privacy is very much, commingled or connected with the history of a country.
My view as an American is that privacy means I have the right to control my own data. When I work with Europeans, there's a different perception because of the history of how data was used in Europe, especially during World War II and following it, to essentially make decisions about people's lives. based on what data was available in the public space. And then you take the fact that I grew up as someone who is half East Indian and half American, knowing that in that culture, the Indian culture, very much the expectation was a community right to knowledge about people. And so the right to privacy was maybe a right to keep things private within the family, but not necessarily private within the family. So I think it's something important for us to remember that privacy, that word, means different things depending on the historical background you come from, the cultural background you come from, and even the legal background in which you're thinking about those issues.
Some cultures might feel more free to expose themselves. Other ones might come to the United States and see the fact that the bathroom stalls are sort of cut off right at the feet, and that you can see people's feet. That strikes people as very strange. And so spatially, there are ways in which people experience privacy differently.
So it's not even that each culture is more or less private. They're private about different topics or about different elements. And I think that's interesting, and that circles back to privacy being an individual right to say, okay, I personally don't want to share this part of my life, which someone else may be happy to share with and may absolutely not understand why you are so problematic about this, but this should be that right to privacy, that you choose what you want to share and not share.
What ties it all together is this fundamental human truth that all of us, regardless of culture, regardless of language, regardless of legal structure that we live within, have certain aspects of our lives in which we need to be able to enjoy a sense of privacy in whatever form that takes.
The privacy is important for individuals for many reasons. I think everybody will have a story where they actually felt intrinsically, deeply, that there is something private that they just don't want to share and they don't want others to know. And so it's respect for that want for something to be private to me.
What you have out in the open is how people perceive you, it's how they judge you, it's how you make independent decisions. And so I think it's a fundamental concept to keep sort of society working in a good way that we want it to.
Without privacy, you have the government, you have corporations looking in on everything you're doing. Your freedom goes out the door. Privacy is critical. To have the freedom to live your life as you wish to live. And I always tell people, look, if you don't care about your privacy, give away your information to everyone you want, as long as you make the decision to do so.
When we live our lives in the digital way in which we live our lives, the ability to be free is directly linked to the way in which our personal information is looked after and is treated by those that collect that information. So, privacy is possibly one of the traits that are most important to the survival of civilization as we know it today, given that technology is becoming so intrinsic in our lives, and privacy is the way in which we manage our ability to use technology.
People want to know that, to be able to shape who they are in the eyes of everybody else. It's at its most fundamental, who am I?
Without the right of privacy, we could not express our liberty to love, our liberty to become what we pretend to be and not what the world wants that we are.
Under the gaze of surveillance, under the threat of information misuse, we tend to withdraw ourselves. We tend to be very measured in the ways in which we share. And you have to put yourself out there a little bit to figure out who you are. You have to play with certain different roles. You have to exercise boundary management and try and fail and try over again. And if you don't have that cushion to fail safely, then your development as a person is going to be stunted. It also is going to affect your relationships with other people. If you can't trust someone else with your personal information, with what your body looks like, with intimacies, then you're not going to have meaningful relationships, both socially, intimate relationships, friendship relationships, but also as a consumer, right? You might withdraw, and so you can't participate in the marketplace effectively without meaningful privacy protections. And finally, our social well-being, our democracy, our right to free expression are dependent upon meaningful privacy rights. I know that sometimes thinking about free expression and privacy, people often think of them as opposing forces, but I think of them actually as completely complementary forces. You really need privacy in order to feel free enough to express yourselves. It's hard to be vocal about governments that you want to critique when there's a camera pointed directly in your face that leads straight to the government, right? And so we need that sort of space individually, socially, and as a body politic.
The big kahuna for the whole of the 21st century has been digital data privacy. That is what has exploded this thing from being something that's vital but interesting, but often ignored, to something that has to be considered, because in the end, digital data privacy and how we do it affects how our children and our grandchildren will live.
Data today is one of the most important things that we share with the world about ourselves. And our ability to control how that gets shared, with whom it's shared, how it is used, goes back to my view of reading that book 1984 and realizing that whoever controls the data and information about us has control over us. And so I think data privacy is incredibly important to ensuring that we maintain our independence in a future world in which we become essentially all that our data says about us.
If we look back over the last 25 years, there was not a lot of mainstream awareness or knowledge of privacy laws, privacy protections, and certainly in an internet era, there was nascent awareness of some of the privacy issues. That has changed so drastically over the past 25 years. And as we look back, there are some major milestones.
If you look at advances in medical technology, if you look at evolutions in society, there have been multiple inflection points where people feel at risk of being disempowered. They feel at risk of losing control of autonomy, of the way people view them, the way people perceive them. Each of those moments, I think, has triggered evolutions in the way that people think about privacy.
I think 2003 is an early milestone. That was the first data breach notification law in the world. It came out of California. All of a sudden, people started receiving letters in the mail saying, hey, your data's been breached. I just wanted to let you know.
The main reason why people increasingly care about privacy and are aware is just the sheer number of notifications of data breaches that we receive. The fact that we fill in countless privacy forms for our children in school, the fact that on a day-to-day basis we're asked to consent for things which we might think trivial, but actually at the end of the day do matter.
What reaches everyday people so that they understand what's happening is what's based in popular media. 9/11 was a game changer. So we have this awful thing happen. And then the government is like, we can't let this happen again. We have to find out who did it. So their surveillance laws are allowed to grow. And everybody's fine with that because everybody's traumatized. So sometimes there's this pendulum, right? Something bad happened, pendulum swinging towards security now. And these people will have less privacy rights, but too bad, because what happened is, worth doing this.
Today we take an essential step in defeating terrorism while protecting the constitutional rights of all Americans. With my signature, this law will give intelligence and law enforcement officials important new tools to fight a present danger.
I became really interested in privacy right after September the 11th, 2001. Everything that came after, particularly the USA Patriot Acts, really affected me deeply. Maybe for the first time, I felt this sense that the law was not right. It was actually deeply wrong in allowing this sort of mass surveillance, a wrongful targeting, I think, of whole groups of people with shared characteristics.
Governments protect their borders, governments protect their citizens, and they collect
data to do so, and they have very good reasons for doing that. It's the part of the conversation about how they get that data that I think is the most contentious piece.
His name is Edward Snowden. He's an American former CIA employee and computer technician. Today, he came out as the leaker of classified NSA documents that spell out a secret surveillance program.
So then Snowden comes along. He's like, yeah, but look what they did, right? They're massive surveillance programs, bulk surveillance, and guess what? U.S. citizens are involved. What? Wait a minute. What happened here? So that got people waking up to government surveillance.
I usually call Snowden the Chernobyl of privacy. Like, that was the point where it was undeniable that there is a problem, or that there is a potential problem for everybody. And I think that was one of the points where broad parts of the society that didn't care about it before, or even said it's not a thing, like, you know, usually in Europe, the more conservative part, actually said, okay, this is a problem.
And it was one of the most significant shifts in how the privacy profession saw itself and how people saw privacy, quite frankly. Because now we had headlines in the US that large tech was able to give access to data to the government for certain purposes that no one would have recognized or understood or knew. So it was the first time the general public had a sense that what they were doing on their phones, on their computers, on their iPads, someone could access it for a purpose that was not something they wanted. You know, I think for a long time, people's assumption was when they did things online, it was for their own self-interest, and that it couldn't be used in any way for something that they had no control over.
The American public, and maybe the world, saw just how much information was being collected and how exposed we were as people, given the apparatuses that were set up to simply funnel information directly to governments around the world.
The office that I ran in the UK investigated Cambridge Analytica and Facebook for allegations of the misuse of data in political campaigns. And that caught the public's attention as nothing else ever did.
The Cambridge Analytica whistleblower who revealed his former company's improper use of data from millions of Facebook users appeared this week before Congress. He told a group of Democrats in the House that Steve Bannon ordered the staff to study ways to suppress Democratic voter turnout and test messaging that dealt with Vladimir Putin.
Facebook had constructed a system that allowed for third parties to use Facebook's tools to collect incredible amounts of personal information over not just the people who were interacting with like a quiz, right? So they did it through things like, what's your personality? And we've all taken the BuzzFeed quiz, but the BuzzFeed quizzes where it's like, you know, what Harry Potter house would you be sorted into? And it was not just the quiz takers whose personal information was getting revealed, but the entire social graph that you're friends with. So think about your profile on Facebook. If someone were to have access to your profile, it's not just you that they have personal information about, it's all your friends. It's who you interact with, how often you interact with them, what they're interested in, what groups you're a part of, and who else is in that group. And so much of that information was able to be essentially exfiltrated out of Facebook servers to eventually, through a researcher, to Cambridge Analytica in a way that it became obvious that Cambridge Analytica was using that information to try to manipulate people to various ends, right? They gained all sorts of insights about who we were, what made us tick, what were we responsive to.
And so even though people didn't necessarily understand in depth what the issue was, they did understand that these kinds of targeting techniques that were used to sell us trainers and holidays and cars, all of a sudden that same technology could be used to influence democratic elections. And then you had a firestorm on your hands.
And I think that for the first time, people realized that Facebook and other platforms were not being good stewards of our personal information and did not necessarily have our interests first, when creating their business model.
Data is being collected about us and then determined what kind of voter I might be and being able to target ads to me. It all seemed a bit dystopian to folks, and it didn't seem even possible. And so when GDPR came out and there started to be a lot of press in the US about the fact that there was going to be this new European law, people in their day jobs started having to be told what they could and couldn't do with data in order to protect their company and to comply with this new law.
Tech companies around the world are prepping for new data legislation that will be enforced in Europe next month, and many are not ready. A report released Wednesday finds that about 60% of businesses are likely to miss the General Data Protection Regulation compliance deadline, and only about 7% of the companies are in full compliance as of today. Now, the regulation, it's also known as GDPR, will go into effect on May 25th.
There was a recognition that maybe what this new law in Europe was doing was something that could be relevant to folks in the US in terms of having some protections and value in this thing called data privacy. And the idea that people would say what was said in the early days of privacy is dead, privacy doesn't matter, started to get more of a reaction from the public.
The GDPR has become probably the most well-known point of reference around data protection law, not just in Europe, but globally.
In Europe, when GDPR kicked in, media did a great job. They educated society and people very well. And we realized the day or the hour GDPR came into force, we received hundreds of user requests like, hey, how is eBay treating our data?
Late night television, the comedians in the United States were talking about GDPR. In terms of hitting a milestone moment, when late night television has a joke in their opening monologue about a European data protection regulation, you've crossed a barrier.
Tech giants have announced plans to add software that would enable contact tracing in their devices, making it possible for government agencies to track the distance between phones using approved apps. But the idea, as you can imagine, is raising concerns over privacy.
COVID was another interesting milestone as well. There was a drive to have exposure notifications. Governments that you would traditionally think of as having been privacy protected wanted to collect data about their citizens that were testing positive to COVID. So, I think that was another milestone in the privacy world, the pandemic.
At the Supreme Court today, an historic upheaval. In a sweeping ruling that overturned a half a century of precedents, 5 justices ended the right of American women to choose abortion under the Constitution.
When the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade and there was a significant change in whether people were able to access abortions in different states, it was a real wake-up moment for many people about the impact on privacy. And the reason is so often people think that that type of information about your pregnancy status, about what information you're browsing online is protected. And then there was this realization that it's not.
Now, privacy experts are concerned that data from apps like Flow and Clue could potentially be used to identify someone that's seeking an abortion.
I think it's important that people realize there have been past court cases where online searches for abortion pills or abortion services have been used to prosecute women.
Right. If you're worried about bounty hunter laws in some states in the US that allow, a husband, a spouse, a loved one to be able to pursue an investigation or a lawsuit against another person for aiding in an abortion, that information is not easily protected by a privacy law right now.
Women taking care of their own health have to cover their tracks online like they're planning a heist. They've got to disable location services. They have to talk to each other through encrypted apps. They have to kill the Duolingo owl before it snitches on them in English and Italian.
So it shows the opportunity. It also shows yet another example of an increase in public consciousness about just how private information is not actually private unless you really take steps to protect it.
As an increasing part of people's lives is intermediated through or dependent upon a suite of technologies, the way that they are accessing information through a mobile device that they're carrying around in their phone every day, the fact that they're relying on location services to understand not only where they are, but to how to get to where they want to go. that awareness is proportionally increasing people's awareness that that information about them exists. And they want to understand, why is it being collected? How is it being processed? And how is that processing advancing their interests? How is that data being disposed of? How long is it being retained for? Who is it being shared with, and why?
What grabs folks' attention even more than some of these big media stories are things like when they see feeds pop up on their devices of things that they may have been looking at. When they say, you know, I had a conversation about something and all of a sudden it just kind of popped up on my news feed. How does that happen? I think in everyday events, people realize how information and things about them are being used in targeted ways. And I think that actually catches the average citizen's attention more so than the things that come out in the media. It's the little things in life that feel like Big Brother is watching me that really gets their attention for privacy.
What we see is this continuing move towards greater sensitivity and awareness of the incredible importance of data, the incredible importance of protecting data, the incredible importance of privacy writ large in societies around the world.
Anyone can take your identity, anyone can take your data, and it's such a fragile thing. I got my DNA online, like I've got Ancestry. It's just, yeah, I just find that at the moment I'm pretty vulnerable. But banking's online. Someone can take my bank. I got scammed the other day, you know, like, and I had to change my card. But that's the life that we live in.
But it seems like you're okay if you use Ancestry and put your DNA online.
Yeah,
It seems like you've accepted that.
I think you have to accept it because it's just the way it is now.
I tweet on a regular basis, or whatever it's called now, Zed, and someone invariably will tweet me back and say, "Lady, that ship has sailed. Privacy's dead. Get another ship." And I would say, "Are you kidding? You get another ship. Privacy forms the foundation of our freedom. You can't just say give up on privacy."
I think there's something of a hype cycle in the trope that privacy is dead, and it is a trope. And we actually looked at 4 technologies over the past 150 years. We looked at the media response to those technologies and the legal response to those technologies. And the way we looked at the media response was we took magazine covers from the era that were talking about both the technology and privacy at the same time. And guess what? Media was saying in 1880, in 1920, in 1960, and in 2000. Every single time, whether it was flexible film and the ability to take pictures surreptitiously, whether it was the telephone, whether it was the rise of mainframe computing, or whether it was the smartphone, mainstream media said privacy was dead every single time.
When we use technology, we leave a whole amount of data behind. When we use technology, we are essentially creating a mirror of what our life is, and is there stored forever in a way. That means that, yes, in that sense, privacy understood as the ability to be truly private is gone.
There is so much data collected on so many people from an individual perspective that at times it's seemingly hard to believe that there is still a concept of personal information, because how can there be privacy and personal information when we're just freely sharing everything, right? And every company is collecting where you browse and what you buy and where you go.
We are, in many ways, sharing more data. More data is flowing. Data is being collected in our home, from our bodies, in our schools, in our cars, in every area of life. But all the more reason that we want rules in place to order that. So I'll take the critics at sort of the shock value. There's a lot of data. Come on, are you really succeeding at giving people privacy? But I'd like to think we should hear those comments and say to them, yes, we get that we are now in a much more data-dependent world. And yes, life has changed from what it was when we were sharing less and didn't have electronic devices in every aspect of our lives. Just because I'm wearing a smart watch to track my fitness And just because I've got a smart speaker doesn't mean I don't care. It means I really want to make sure that that data is being used the way I want it and the way that is necessary and reasonable, and not being misused in ways that can hurt me.
People get overwhelmed just by how much information is out there. And I think they feel this sinking sense that they don't have control over personal information. And so when you cabin privacy only as control over personal information, you run into this problem where people immediately recognize that they don't have any control because they're hopelessly outmatched by the most powerful companies ever to exist.
There's a cartoonist in New Zealand who most in the privacy community will have encountered called Chris Slane. And years ago, he drew a cartoon. And it's an image of a person with a blindfold on and a cane walking around a space where there are different marketplaces. And a whole lot of people are standing around watching them with clipboards. And he was conveying the sense that when we participate in some of these digital fora, we're not aware of the number of people that are observing us, the ways in which our data is transacted and exploited.
I think there's a lot that people do not understand about privacy, but we should be mindful of not being condescending about what people do not understand about privacy. It's not necessarily that they don't understand that privacy matters and they don't care. It's more that the means that we're giving people to control their privacy, to give them real choices, might not be effective.
People are pushed, nudged, forced, cajoled into sharing more information in ways that they're not fully comfortable with.
I think cookie consents are the absolute worst example of helping to protect privacy. They just facilitate the collection of more information than is necessary to track people throughout the web, because nobody reads them and nobody understands what that really means. Oh, you're going to serve me ads that are more relevant, but you're also potentially taking that information and selling it to data brokers and sharing it with other third parties who now are going to learn about me and piecing all this information together.
Now, the Europeans like to think that GDPR has had a massive influence globally, and it's certainly caused a lot of compliance activity, but I'm not sure yet that it's actually really changed what's happened much to people's personal information, including, the really totemic example is the privacy cookie notice. It's now clearer that you're being screwed. That's all. Not much has changed.
The law just says you have to not take people's data unless they consent. So the cookie banner is not what the GDPR requires. The cookie banner is how companies try to kind of eliminate the GDPR in a way. But that is not how it's framed. And that is a big problem in transporting the correct message.
I think one of the things that people who are not in the privacy profession don't quite understand is just how much data is collected about them on a daily basis, and how much what they see online is shaped by that data that is collected about them. So the fact that they might read an article in the news and not even recognize that the person sitting next to them will not see that same article, may not see that same ad, may not get that same price when they go to buy something, because of the fact that what they have been doing on their device informs the version of the world they see.
I sometimes sound like the anti-data protection officer or the anti-regulator, because I think, well, okay, if you're going to put your data out there, then maybe you're getting what you asked for. You got to actually take some responsibility of yourself. And that to me is quite important. If you don't want to read your privacy notices, or you just tick the box to consent every time, what good are you doing yourself? If you find that you're in a situation where your data has been compromised, helping people understand that it starts with them is really a passion of mine. And, you have to actually take some responsibility for yourself.
There are still ways to protect your privacy. And that's why consent is so critical. Positive consent, where you have to positively say, yes, I want my information used for this purpose and this purpose alone.
So I think that control over personal information is the wrong way to think about privacy. And I think that consent is a broken regulatory mechanism. which is unfortunate because so many of our privacy laws are built around these two notions. But if you think about it, users are being set up to fail. The way that control is manifested in using technologies is through I agree buttons and knobs and switches. And so it's not as though I can call up Google and say, "Dear Google, I would like for you to track my location only on Wednesdays and only when I'm going to and from work and no other time." Right? I can only sort of have the button that they give me to while you're using the app, while you're not using the app, and everything else. And so any choice that we make is going to be probably fine with Google because they're the ones that created the user interface. The problem with thinking about privacy as consent and control is that if you get your wish for more privacy, you get so much consent and control that you choke on it.
If you want me to know how you intend to use my information, you should be able to tell me. And if you can't explain it, if it's going to take 20 pages that I have to read, I'm not going to consent to it because that means there are additional uses somewhere buried in there probably. I reject that. You have to explain to me, why do you want my information? How do you intend to use it?
Company collects my data. What do I want to know about to make an informed decision about my privacy? Well, I want to know essentially, right? What's the risk? How much of what benefit am I going to get, and what harm could come my way? Is it going to help me more, or is it going to hurt me? That's really what I think people really want to be able to determine. Is it going to be good for me or bad for me? And the problem is that that's incredibly difficult to make that calculation. The companies will put all this stuff in the privacy notice, but no one reads privacy notices. And we have studies that show that hardly anyone does, less than 1%. And even if they read them, it's not clear that they're very meaningful. They don't say anything meaningful. So if I look at a privacy notice saying, we protect your data with reasonable security, well, what does that mean?
You see a long statement of terms of service and the click-through windows that you have to do to access a given website or use a tool, and people feel they have no power, so of course they click through anyway. So one of the things that we really fight for is to say, no, there should be user controls, but also baseline safeguards required through regulation to make sure that people's privacy is respected. And when you actually talk to people about that, saying, here's a particular practice, do you think that's right or do you think that's wrong? What should be done about it? That's when you realize people really do care about their privacy. They hear stories about the information that some of the commercial data brokers are collecting and selling in the open market, and they're outraged. So I don't think that people's expectations have gone down to zero. I think we're actually entering an era of new awareness where people realize just how much information is gathered and tracked and the impact it can have on their daily lives.
It's incumbent upon us to spend time actually telling people, yes, this is what is going to happen if you do share this data. And that's obviously shared in privacy notices, but we all know that not everybody reads those. When that becomes the standard, when that becomes the norm, maybe something else has to change. Maybe the approach has to change.
I don't think there's any way for the average citizen to truly understand it. You have to put the onus on the corporations to do the right thing so that people can have some kind of shortcut to trust. There's just no way for the average person to figure it all out for themselves.
Notice and choice is the most bullshit principle the world has ever seen. It's like basically putting stickers on everything and then not being liable for it. And that doesn't solve the problem. It just puts more stickers in the world. And we did that with websites as well, where we called the sticker privacy policy. But I usually explain this system to Europeans where it's not that common, with Prop 65 in California, where basically everything is labeled that could potentially be cancerous. And I was actually renting a car over here once, and at the car parking lot at Hertz, I took a picture of the driver's window where it says, this car has cancerous material, you could have birth defects, and I don't know, all this kind of stuff. And then this is the notice, and your choice is, take the fucking car or walk. How does it solve anything? Like, if it's really cancerous, just not build it in a fucking car. If it's not really a problem, then just not have a sticker. And this responsibility shifting approach is very ethically extremely problematic, in the sense you shift the responsibilities to someone else.
When you go to the supermarket and you buy milk, you don't have to research the farm that the milk came from. You don't have to become an expert in pasteurization. You don't have to become a milk expert and know all the different issues that could happen with milk. You can buy the milk and you can trust that someone has figured out what milk should be safe, and it's going to be pretty safe. And you can decide, okay, what brand do I like? What milk tastes the best? What's the best price, etc. And you don't have to worry about these other things. Someone's figured that detailed stuff out. And I think privacy should work the same way.
Every time I go to my hometown, I go on a bullet train that goes like 230 kilometers an hour. I don't care about train safety. I do not sit in this train and be like, oh, I haven't checked the wheels and I should have really read the instructions on Siemens's bullet trains, Like, no one does that.
For most of our lives, the world has been made safe for us by rules, frameworks, laws, guidelines that we didn't write, but were developed by people we trust, and sometimes trust with our lives. Medicines that won't kill us, doctors that won't kill us, aeroplanes that are safe to fly in, cars that are safe to drive, buildings that don't collapse on us. But for some reason, in data alone, personal information alone, we've said, that's the wrong way of going about it. People should be able to make up their own minds. I literally cannot buy an unsafe car. It's illegal to buy an unsafe car. It's illegal for a pharmacy to sell me drugs that haven't gone through the right regulatory processes. You cannot fly an aeroplane that doesn't meet the requirements, and I could go on, but only for personal information are you supposed to be making your own decisions. It's rubbish.
I think people only realize once you compare it to any other area of law, where we would never accept that, it's not Boeing not building planes properly, it's you as a passenger not checking the plane before you board. It's absurd. But in the privacy bubble, we accept that even though these systems are even more complex than bolts in a Boeing plane. Like bolts, you can physically check a lot of that. And, the grandmother just wants to see pictures on, I don't know, Instagram of their grandchildren or whatever. Cannot possibly check what Instagram does with that data. It's just technically impossible. Nevertheless, there's this idea of, she should have read or something, some policy that not even the people that write these policies ever understands. And I think that is a bit specific to the privacy world and must have historic reasons of just starting off that way, thereby making it the norm and just repeating that narrative over and over until everybody somehow believes it.
I think ultimately this is the big problem with our current approach to privacy. You put all this in the notice, and the notices are often not very meaningful, and then we hope that somehow people are going to do this impossible task of managing their privacy at all these companies. It just won't work.
When I first started reading public statements from the biggest internet companies, they would say things like, we're thoughtful about privacy. And I'm like, what's that mean? You think about it and forget it? What? And I watched some of these companies grow up and I'm like, you don't really care about our privacy rights because your business model is built on data and you can't really help it because you want to offer free services and that's how we get the free services.
We are giving away our data that is being used for advertising to fund the free services. I'm not sure anybody realized at the beginning that this is the trade-off. I don't think it's something that we discussed as a society. I don't think it's something we discussed at a kind of company to consumer level. I think it happened over time.
So the internet has brought us such incredible opportunity for society, new ways for people to find community, to access information, new ways to express ourselves and democratize expression. But it did come at the cost of being built on the back of this commercial advertising infrastructure. And what's interesting is that that's a grand bargain that society struck when we sought access to newspapers, right? You get a newspaper at a low cost and it's subsidized by ads. We got it with the soap operas, right? Which are called soap operas because ads for soap were sold in the gaps in between. And that's how we got access to low or free content. But what happens when you move to the digital realm is that advertisers aren't just placing ads alongside content that might be relevant to a particular audience. Instead, what they're doing is actually collecting much more information about a user, including the various breadcrumbs of what websites they visited before they go to that website, where they're going after, and much more information about where you're traveling at any given time, what your buying habits might be, which really can be aggregated down to a very specific personal level. And that is a grand bargain that comes with much bigger costs. And the reason is, you might think that it's okay, hey, I'm being targeted with shoe ads and those shoes are following me around the internet, and that's not a big deal. But what about when those are ads for payday loans that are being targeted at vulnerable communities? Ads for kind of, Medicaid support services, which it turns out really are scams to target the elderly and are being targeted specifically at them. We've seen it with political messaging being targeted to particular demographics, particular audience with extreme micro-targeting precision to shape people's perception of the world and get much more influence over our democratic processes. And those are much bigger harms.
In theory, there is nothing wrong with a business model that says, you want this service, this product, this is the exchange. I'll give you that if you give me something and allow me to use it. The problem is there's an enormous information asymmetry. That's the first problem. We have seen these business models grow up without informed consent, without the party offering the service really explaining the cost. The second problem, I think, is one of human cognition. We are not wired to be able to make sophisticated decisions about trading off an immediate short-term gain or gratification against a longer-term cost, which may be opaque. And this is the fundamental problem, I think, with relying on consent models and imposing on individuals by pretending to empower them to make decisions. In fact, devolving to them responsibility for very sophisticated decisions based on insufficient information.
We are potentially in an Orwellian society with technology and surveillance everywhere, and we carry our phones everywhere, and we know that they track everything we do, and it's very hard to understand the controls that are on them. And at the same time, the growth of the privacy profession, the growth of the privacy regulators, the acute awareness among individuals, and surveys always show that privacy matters, and there is a perception that individuals lose control. And so we have this disconnect to reconcile. It's a challenge for the privacy community, for sure.
I think the public understands and wants the privacy and wants their information secure, but they don't understand how much work goes into it each day by the privacy professionals and others.
These same technologies that are causing this massive tectonic shift in the world are going to create incredible opportunities for us to protect privacy using privacy-enhancing technologies, making more privacy-protective products. I'm actually quite optimistic about the future of privacy.
We react strongly when we see a technological innovation that challenges our understanding of privacy. And we are in that moment right now with AI, with facial recognition. We are in the turbulence of that innovation right now. We react strongly by thinking that the sky is falling, that privacy is dead. But I actually think the exact opposite is true. I think what has happened is the context of privacy has changed. The way we experience privacy has changed. New technologies mediate privacy in new ways. So whenever anyone says privacy is dead, I think the reaction is it's not dead, it's being renegotiated.
Did you know that there is a privacy profession, that there's people whose whole job is privacy?
I mean, I suppose that there is, but I don't know anyone involved in that career.
Me neither.
I know there are government dependencies that specialize in privacy and oversee the procedures that are carried in the correct way, but I don't know anyone specialized in privacy.
Well, you do now.
Oh, good.
I remember vividly being asked by senior management at IBM to, could you please add privacy to your portfolio and go figure out a strategy for IBM. That was back in 1995, actually. And it was a new world to me. I didn't know anything about the area, and I wasn't practicing privacy law. I was understanding what had come before us, what were the laws and the issues that privacy law and doctrine had worked on in the past, and then trying to make sense of where would we go now. That's how I got into it.
I started looking at privacy and really focusing on it in the late 90s. I started teaching in the year 2000. And at that time, the number of privacy professionals out there, I could count on one hand.
I enroll in this course, Information Privacy Law, taught by Dan Solov, and it changed my world. It opened me to this world of new laws that were out there that were not only changing rapidly, but in many cases there was no law on point. We sort of were grasping for analogies and things. And so I decided then and there that I wanted to practice information privacy law if I could. So I walk into Dan's office, and I'll never forget, I knocked on his door, and I sit down and we start talking about privacy law, and it's so exciting. I said, I want to be a privacy lawyer. And he said something to the effect of, that's not a thing.
We don't have the GDPR. We don't have privacy laws in a lot of countries like we do now. At companies, privacy was not really much of an issue on their radar screen. But this started to become bigger and bigger and bigger as the internet grew.
At the law firm I was working at the time, Wilson Sonsini, Goodrich & Rosati, I was the very first and only associate doing data privacy. We didn't have a partner doing data privacy. And one day, one of the partners came up to me after I'd given a presentation to the department around data privacy and said, "Why are you doing this? This is really not good for your career. You're really never going to have a career in privacy. There's not even laws that apply except in Europe, and most of our clients aren't in Europe. So what are you doing?" Which was a really good point at the time.
The early practice of the privacy field was a lot of trying to distill out of the very few guideposts that we had a directional indicator as to what risk looked like, what compliance looked like.
At the company I eventually went to, I presented to the president of the company on why I thought we needed a data privacy program. And his view was, but no one else is doing that. Why would we? Which was a fair point. So I think one of the challenges as a data privacy practitioner, especially in those early days, was in the belief that what you did mattered and that there was a role for it. And even if there weren't laws that said you had to follow it, that there was an ethical code that kind of drove what we were trying to do as a profession.
What really changed, though, was when the community came together. When things started to get better was when privacy pros found each other.
Someone said to me, "Well, you're so interested in data privacy, I assume you're going to IAPP events." And I was like, "What's IAPP?" And they're like, "It's the International Association of Privacy Professionals." And I was like, "There's others out there."
We were engaged across other companies working on privacy issues. And we would have coffee, we would get together. And I remember sitting around a table, there were about 15 of us or so. And we were saying it would be great to have an organization of some type. And we could start very small, but let's start something. And that's how IAPP was born.
In 2000, a group came together to organize a conference on privacy, and I was asked to be the chair of the organization. And it began to grow. As I said, people were joining a bandwagon. It was like a movement.
Probably the most important decision and development in the history of IAPP is when our initial efforts to organize something, and I think it was called I forget what it was called, like the Association of Privacy Officers or something like that, was our decision to really step it up a notch and hire a professional employee.
I tell many people, and I say it to him, and I'll say it to anyone, the best hire I ever had was Trevor Hughes in October of 2002.
And I came into the IAPP, I think we had less than 500 members. My recollection is 300 members, individual members, and not very much money in the bank. And I was the part-time executive director.
We tapped into what was a tide to need a group to bring their professionals together and really help legitimize and inform what this profession is all about.
The membership growth of the IAPP has been astounding. There was a point in time where I had a board member ask me, like, how big do we think this could get? And we were less than 1,000 members, and he and I sort of noodled through the issue and came up with, well, maybe there's 1,500 people around the world who are going to do this work. Of course, we've blown through that number. We've blown through every expectation that we have. We have 85,000 members today. Our expectation is that we will have many tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of members more in the future.
IAPP, in its early years, had become more than just a project that we helped create. It was became a community, a real community, where there was a lot of mutual respect and support. And just to say it became a kind of a family is probably a little hokey, but it's true.
IAPP has done something incredible in that it created a community for this ambitious, excited, highly energized group of professionals of all ages, from across industries, from across professions, with different kinds of backgrounds all over the world, who recognized that something was changing.
A lot of us have this sort of sense of justice, you know, that you want to proliferate. And so I think that's what connects a lot of us, is that passion, that real drive to do the right thing and to help people understand how to do the right thing.
The privacy profession is built of people who are generally very concerned for the people around them and the world around them, as opposed to just simply being exploitative. So it's a very, in that sense, a generous, thoughtful, enclosing community.
So it's really been interesting to see the diversity in privacy, because we've seen so many women succeed and in fact lead the programs and become the chief privacy officer.
We are nearly exactly 50-50 male-female in our membership. We've surveyed our membership. When we've looked at salary data, there's variation at the margins, but largely there is either parity or, in some cases, women actually making a little bit more than men. And I think that is because disproportionately women are represented at the highest levels of our field.
So I remember meeting one of my former colleagues maybe 20 years ago. And we had started our law practice, or we were practicing law together when I first graduated from law school in the early 90s. And we met up and we were exchanging, pleasantries. And this person said, so what are you working on now? I said, pretty much all of my time I'm spending on privacy. And he looked at me and he said, why? And he said, I've never heard that before. And I said, well, it's going to be a big issue. And it already is, but it's not generally known. And he said, okay, that's great. I'll go. Yeah, good luck with that. And I felt like, oh my gosh, maybe I haven't made the right choice. Nobody knows anything about what I'm working on. And then I realized, we're just early. We're just early, and this is going to go someplace. And I think good luck with that. The notion of, this is really whatever. This is new and it's fringe. And yeah, I think for whatever reason, maybe that dynamic of, well, she'll do that. It became easy to get into. Nobody else was like, you were asked to go do something new in your organization, in a company. And, sure, I'll try that.
It was new. And women were going to law schools. So we made up a lot larger, 50% of a law school class. So here was a new practice area that had openings for us that we didn't have to work through a network to get involved, and it was all new. And so there was a tremendous amount of opportunity.
Back then, the partners, predominantly male partners, were asking around in law firms like, who wants to, work a little bit on privacy? And they were asking the female junior associate or the part-time working mom, because they thought this is not very prestigious. Back then, it was not a revenue driver. And this is why a lot of female associates actually said, okay, I do this privacy work.
Often people give to women something nobody knows about, and not many men who were at higher positions put their hand up and volunteered for this because it was a bit unknown. It wasn't seen to be exciting, sexy. It wasn't seen to have prospects. So I think by default, you had more women at the entry level given this job within the organizations.
It's a technical topic, so it's interesting. You go into details, and personally, I kind of like that, the intricacies of privacy. But it also goes very deep. It resonates. We touch on social issues, economic issues. There are lots of dimensions to privacy and data protection generally. It's a fascinating, complex field, and I think women like complexity. Not to say that men cannot deal with complexity, are not attracted by it, but that probably makes it an interesting space for us to grow, because we are used to juggling different things at the same time.
This is a very stereotypical thing to say, but women are very more collaborative. I think that's been proven as leaders. You have to be a collaborative leader in a space like privacy, because you are literally interacting with every part of the company. And so I think that women's strengths kind of have played into the space as well.
I do think women have got some skills which are actually needed for good privacy officer. One is listening. The other one is consensus building. Women are good at building consensus. Women are good at engaging and solving in a constructive way and giving time and listening to left side and right side and this interest and that interest and this benefit and this risk. So I kind of feel there's lots of balancing in privacy, and I think women are good at that.
A community of any kind builds on itself, and you see women who are like you, being accomplished and helping each other. And there was a real sense in the privacy community of, I don't want to say just women, but a lot of women supporting each other.
My first IAPP meeting, I saw several keynote speakers and several panelists on the stage, and boy, was that encouraging and inspiring. And not only women, but also minorities as well. And it was great to see that. And I think it has been it has been a profession where women have been encouraged to pursue. I think women have excelled, and I think it creates an example for other women who are thinking about the profession or who are new to the profession to see to what they can aspire.
It was a really unique profession to be in, where I could see women in power doing a job at a very high level within organizations, and being able to still, quite frankly, rise and compete in that area.
So I think once you have women there, it's a beachhead, and you don't have women in other roles, and that's, just the counter, right? The boys club. This is the girls club, maybe, I don't know. But it's definitely very inclusive.
Privacy was just a red hot mess early on. And so a lot of women said, well, let me go figure that out, and I can, make it better and clean it up and figure out how to create some governance and programs and put them in place. And I think that's why we had so many eventually senior women in it, because I've done this myself. I have cleaned up so many different things. I've had a lot of different practice areas. And a lot of them have been, oh, well, that's a mess. I'm going to go fix it. It's not attractive to a lot of men. It doesn't necessarily come with power or even any visibility. It's just something interesting. I learned something. It's the right thing to do. So I think privacy was like that. And it ended up with a lot of women in it. And it's glorious.
Once you had the chief privacy officer phenomenon that started in 2000, I remember, talking a lot about it then. What happened with that is that now you have an accountable leader for the privacy program inside a company. That means now you're no longer a piece of paper and a lawyer. Now you have to make things work. You have to do what you say you will do.
Chief Privacy Officer is a completely multifaceted role. I always say you have to be technologist, lawyer, great manager, great leader, very good project management skills, and you have to be inspirational as well. You have to explain why this matters to your company. You have to get people behind you. And for that, you need really all of these different skills.
You need compliance people, you need auditors, assessors, lawyers, of course, and now you have technologists who are trying to automate things or take data, manipulate it so that the privacy issues may be mitigated, right? So I'm not surprised at all that we have this explosion of different types of disciplines get into the mix, because now we're going from privacy as a policy issue to privacy as a practical, everyday thing that has to be managed well.
What makes me very optimistic is the diversification of the privacy profession. You now see jobs like privacy engineers, which never existed, before. You see privacy professionals growing in regions where there were none before. It is a profession that is now well established. How many thousands of members at the IAPP? If just to judge by that, I think we can be optimistic, because there is a critical mass of people who take privacy seriously and take it not only as a source of income through compliance efforts, but also as a societal goal.
So we've become kind of a cause. We've become really more than a field because of the range of ways that people can engage in the issues that are on our plate.
The big challenge for privacy and the privacy profession over the next 5 years, I think, is going to be keeping up with technology, driving those messages of privacy by design is important. Inserting that little bit of friction in the race to market to make sure that products and services are thoroughly stress tested against privacy values before being brought to market.
Companies which have been fueled by data and have become the leading organizations and the leading companies in the world are now having to rethink their business models and assess to what extent they can continue to be a successful business with different types of data, with less data, being more privacy conscious than ever before. So that's a real challenge, not just for those companies, but for everyone else in this field, because we all need to start thinking about how to reconcile the value of data with the fact that the digital economy may have to be less dependent on data going forward.
We need senior people who are at the table, at the executive suite, dealing with boards. I worry that privacy could get pushed down as we have lots and lots of very specific rules. I don't want to see that happen. I think that would lose that integrity, that mission, that at the end of the day, it's about sophisticated people helping make moral decisions at the highest levels of an organization.
Privacy has spent the last 20 years enjoying the reputation of being the fastest growing, most exciting, most politically relevant, often highly compensated profession across a wide range of domains and disciplines and geographies and industries. Now we are in a moment where it feels like there is a shift because everyone is so excited and enthusiastic about artificial intelligence, what that means for the world, how that's going to change business and culture and government and everything else. Privacy professionals have an extraordinarily important voice in that conversation. I think we are collectively trying to sort out what that is.
The biggest challenge, I think, for privacy, and maybe for privacy professionals, as a consequence, I think, is to remain stable despite all the hypes that you're being subjected to. You may have noticed that AI is now a thing, right? And of course, AI is a thing. And so, it's AI all over the place, like it was big data all over the place a few years back. And, it's and the privacy community, I think, is resilient and is capable of taking these shocks. But we have to stay the chart, right? To stay on course and remember that the core of what we do is really about people and helping people, protecting the data, of course, but behind the data, there are people. And so we should never forget that.
I think one of the biggest challenges for privacy is overcoming the belief that we can no longer protect it. I encounter that almost on a daily basis, where companies and government departments think this is just beyond our reach, especially with AI. And that's what is, I try to fundamentally change that mindset. Of course, it's going to be more difficult. There's no question. I'm not saying this is a piece of cake. So what? We do many things that are difficult. Look at the medical community, the scientific community. This is for our freedom. We cannot just say, well, we can't do it anymore. You have to start from a premise. We can always protect privacy. We can do it, but it is becoming much more difficult.
When I look at privacy going forward, it's now becoming a very central role within organizations for guiding strategy around usage of data, thinking through new technologies like AI, and also serving as an ethical center for organizations in terms of how they use their data and what they do with it.
5 years from now, I'm not sure that companies will be advertising for a chief privacy officer so much as they would be looking for somebody who can actually manage data and the ethical governance of data within a company.
Privacy leaders, privacy professionals absolutely have enormous career potential, right? There's going to be a lot of growth, but it's going to be a demanding and challenging field. I think we will see a continued expansion of the privacy role. It may not even be called a privacy officer going forward, but there will be a role responsible for these digital policy issues, this digital responsibility inside organizations that will be a difficult, complex, but absolutely amazing job.
People who are passionate and interested in making a difference, come on into the privacy profession. You can make a difference here.
I cannot believe how lucky I am, how lucky we are to work in a field that gets to touch all of these fascinating issues, gets to touch technology and public policy and complex challenges. We're not a 150-year-old profession dealing with dusty laws and dusty standards. We are a dynamic, ever-changing, complex space.
I mean, what I really love about this role is a couple of things. It touches every facet of the company. It touches our lives. Like my family can understand the implications of what I do.
I feel like every day when I get up, I feel I have a purpose. I'm doing something which actually helps people out there live a better life, helps our society do better, create better laws, comply better, create better technologies.
All I have to do is open my email and I learn something. I mean, that's a fantastic career to have. I'm never bored. There's a person you're going to meet who you can learn from like every single day, and that makes it exciting and rewarding.
Given the ubiquity of data and tech in arbitrating so much of our life, today, privacy is about power. Who has information and the ability to make decisions about you? That could be a parent, that could be a school, it could be government, it could be big companies. Privacy is about allocating power and wealth and knowledge in society. It's about equity and fairness. It's about democracy. It's really about some very global core human rights concerns. I don't think I had that broad of a view of it when I started out and was just worrying about cookies and online tracking. And you know what? For many privacy practitioners, that might seem like a naive statement. It's about tick boxes and contracts. How can I really be playing a role in the balance of power in society, right? And we shouldn't minimize it. We're really ordering what kind of a world we want to live in. And that's a huge obligation.
We all get to come to work every day and work on issues that are absolutely critical, but we get to do it in a professional community that shows this incredible amount of compassion and engagement and connection to each other. And that's not common. It's actually really uncommon. And so if there was an overarching sentiment or emotion that I have leading the IAPP, but also being a privacy pro in this big space that we're in, it's gratitude. Gratitude for being able to do what we do and being able to do it with the people that we do it with.